Susan makes $95,000 a year. Linda makes 52. On paper, Susan should be the one sleeping easy tonight. She's not. Linda is. Walk into their kitchens right now and you'd find two totally different women, and only one of them is actually free. This is the story of how a smaller paycheck built a bigger life, and the one forgotten rule that made it happen. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button, because what Linda found tucked inside her mother's old ledger is about to change the way you look at every single dollar. The Hook and the Tale of Two Earners. Susan makes $95,000 a year. Linda makes $52,000. On paper, Susan should be the one sleeping easy at night. She isn't. Linda is. If you looked inside their kitchens right now, you'd find two completely different women, and only one of them is actually free. This is the story of how a smaller paycheck built a bigger life, and the forgotten rule that made it possible. Stick around, because the answer isn't about income at all. It's about something almost nobody talks about anymore. If stories like this speak to you, consider subscribing before we go further, because what Linda discovered in her mother's old ledger changes everything you think you know about money. It starts on an ordinary Tuesday evening in a quiet Ohio suburb. Susan pulls into her driveway in a leased SUV, exhausted before she even opens the car door. Inside her home, the counters are lined with unopened Amazon boxes. A stack of mail sits untouched by the door. 3 of the envelopes are past due. Her closet holds clothes with tags still on them, purchases she barely remembers making. Susan works longer hours than almost anyone she knows. She earns more than most of her neighbors, and yet if she lost her job tomorrow, she would have 11 days before real trouble began. 11 days. That number keeps her up at night, though she rarely says it out loud. 2 miles away, Linda is sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee, going through a worn spiral notebook. Her home is modest, her car is 8 years old and paid off, her cabinets are organized, her fridge has exactly what she needs, and nothing more. Linda earns $43,000 less than Susan every single year, but Linda has 18 months of expenses saved. 18 months! She could lose her job tomorrow and her family's life would barely change. Somewhere between these two women lies a secret that has nothing to do with income and everything to do with a set of rules America quietly forgot. We're about to uncover them one by one. Susan's story: the cost of modern chaos. To understand why Susan feels poor while earning so much, you have to understand what modern life has quietly trained her to do. Every notification on her phone is a tiny invitation to spend. Every scroll through social media plants a small seed of comparison. A neighbor's new patio furniture, a coworker's vacation photos, a stranger's "get ready with me" video ending in a haul from 5 different stores. None of it feels like pressure in the moment. It feels like normal Tuesday scrolling. But by the end of the month, Susan's credit card statement tells a different story, one she doesn't fully recognize as her own doing. Susan isn't careless, she isn't foolish. She is, in many ways, a product of an environment engineered to separate people from their money in the smallest, most painless increments possible. A subscription here, a buy now, pay later split into 4 easy payments there, a closet reorganization service because the closet got too full to close. She pays for storage units to hold things she once paid to buy. She pays interest on furniture she no longer likes. Researchers have a name for what she's experiencing. The psychological weight of clutter raises stress hormones in the body, even when a person insists they don't notice it. Here's what almost nobody explains to women like Susan. Everything she owns costs her money twice. There's the price she paid at the register, and then there's the second cost, the maintenance, the storage, the guilt, the space it occupies in her home and in her mind. A boat costs $30,000 to buy. It can cost over $100,000 more across 10 years in storage, insurance, upkeep, and fuel. Money that, if invested instead, could have grown into $50,000 of retirement security. Susan has never bought a boat, but her closet, her garage, and her spare room are full of smaller versions of the exact same mistake. By the time Susan turns off the kitchen light most nights, she isn't thinking about any of this directly. She just feels tired in a way rest doesn't fix. What she doesn't know yet is that 2 miles away, a woman earning far less has quietly solved the exact problem keeping her awake, using a method her own grandmother would have recognized instantly. Linda's secret: the replacement test. Linda didn't discover her system in a finance book. She found it in a cedar chest in her mother's attic, tucked inside a worn household ledger from 1958. Her mother had grown up during the tail end of the Great Depression, raised by a woman who wasted nothing and questioned everything before it entered the house. Inside that ledger was a simple habit written in fading pencil: before anything comes in, ask whether you would buy it again, today, at full price. If the answer is no, it doesn't belong in the home. Linda calls it the replacement test, and it quietly reshaped the way she lives. Picture a 1950s housewife named Dorothy standing at her kitchen counter on a Sunday afternoon, sorting through a drawer of odds and ends. She picks up a mixing bowl with a small chip in the rim. She pauses. Would she walk into the store today and buy this exact bowl, in this condition, for the price she originally paid? If the honest answer is no, the bowl doesn't stay out of guilt or nostalgia. It gets repurposed, given away, or let go entirely. Linda isn't being cold, she's being clear. And that clarity is exactly what modern households have lost in the flood of easy purchases and overflowing closets. Linda applies the same test today, just with modern language. She calls it her "would I buy this again" rule, and she runs it through her home every few months: the pantry, the closet, the garage. When she finds something she wouldn't repurchase, she doesn't just donate it and move on, the way a minimalism video might suggest. She thinks like Dorothy would have. An old cotton dress she wouldn't buy again doesn't go in the trash. It becomes fabric scraps for a quilt or patches for her son's work jeans. A chipped mug becomes a pen holder on her desk. Nothing gets discarded without first being asked, what else could this become? This single habit, pausing before ownership, questioning before spending, created something Susan doesn't have: space. Not just physical space in a closet, but mental space, financial space, breathing room. And Linda was about to discover that this space had a name her grandmother's generation understood perfectly, but almost no one uses today. The hidden price tag, the second cost. Here's where the story takes a turn most viewers don't expect. Linda's ledger discovery wasn't really about decluttering at all. It was about something far more valuable: understanding the true total cost of everything she owned. Her mother had written a phrase at the top of one ledger page that stuck with Linda for weeks: "Nothing is paid for once." At first, Linda didn't understand it. Then she started doing the math on her own life, and the number nearly took her breath away. Take something as simple as a gym membership Susan signed up for 2 years ago and rarely uses. The sticker price feels small, $40 a month. But multiply that by 24 months of guilt-tinged auto payments, and it's nearly $1,000 spent on something delivering almost no value. Now imagine that same $40 invested every month instead, growing quietly in an index fund. Over 15 years, at a modest average market return, that forgotten gym membership could represent tens of thousands of dollars in lost future security. This is the second cost. The first cost is what you pay at checkout. The second cost is what that money could have become had it never left your hands at all. Linda started applying this lens to everything. The storage unit she almost rented for holiday decorations, $70 a month, $900 a year for boxes she opens twice annually. The car she almost leased instead of buying used, a payment that never ends versus a payment that eventually stops. Every purchase decision became a simple question. What is this thing's second cost, and is it worth what I'll give up to keep paying it? This wasn't about deprivation, it was about clarity. Linda wasn't saying no to things, she was saying yes to her own future. Picture the receipts sitting in an old cigar box on Linda's counter, next to a small notebook where she jots down not just what she spent, but what that money might have grown into if she hadn't. It's a strange kind of accounting, one her mother's generation practiced instinctively, out of necessity. For Linda, it became a choice, and that choice is exactly why she has 18 months of savings, while Susan has 11 days. Reviving Depression-era skills for modern money. To really understand where Linda's security came from, you have to go back further, to the households that survived the 1930s with almost nothing, and somehow came out the other side with resourcefulness that lasted generations. These weren't people obsessed with money. They were people who understood margin, the small, protected gap between what comes in and what goes out. That gap was survival. Today, it's the closest thing to financial freedom most families will ever find. Imagine a woman named Ruth standing at her kitchen sink in 1933, mixing vinegar and baking soda into a jar to scrub her countertops because store-bought cleaner wasn't in the budget that month. The smell is sharp, almost medicinal. Her hands are cracked from the cold well water. She isn't doing this because it's trendy. She's doing it because every dollar not spent on cleaning supplies is a dollar that stays in the coffee can behind the flour bin, the coffee can that will one day cover a doctor's bill or a broken wagon wheel or a bad month. Ruth's resourcefulness wasn't a lifestyle choice, it was armor. Linda makes her own cleaning spray now too, not out of necessity, but because she noticed something Ruth would have understood instantly. The $40 a month she used to spend on specialty cleaning products now goes straight into an index fund account she doesn't touch. It isn't a dramatic amount, but multiplied across years, it becomes real money, quietly compounding in the background of an ordinary life. She mends her son's jeans instead of replacing them, the way Ruth would have darned a sock by lamplight. Not because she has to, because she's discovered that the have to and the choose to lead to the exact same number in the bank account. This is what almost nobody explains about old-fashioned frugality. It was never really about being cheap. It was about creating something invisible but powerful, financial margin, the space between income and expenses. That space is what buys freedom. And Linda was about to learn that this freedom had a very specific, very modern name. The 24-hour rule and the modern envelope. Linda's mother never had a smartphone, but she had something just as powerful: friction. Back in the 1950s, spending money took effort. You had to physically go to the bank, withdraw cash, walk to the store, and hand over bills you could count with your own fingers. That friction gave people a moment to think. Today, a purchase takes 4 seconds and 1 thumbprint. The friction is gone, and so, for many families, is the pause that used to come before every dollar left the house. Picture a woman named Barbara in 1962, standing at her kitchen table with a set of envelopes labeled in careful cursive: groceries, gas, church, savings. Each week she divides her husband's paycheck into those envelopes, cash only. When the grocery envelope is empty, the spending stops. Not because she's out of willpower, but because she's physically out of money. There's no invisible credit line whispering just this once. The envelope is empty. The decision is already made for her, and that certainty brings her a strange kind of peace. Linda can't exactly carry envelopes to the grocery store in 2026, so she built a modern version instead. She uses separate banking buckets, sub-accounts inside her regular bank, one for groceries, one for gas, one for fun money, one for savings, each funded at the start of the month and never touched beyond its limit. When her grocery bucket is empty, she stops, exactly the way Barbara's envelope forced her to. She'd also added a rule of her own. Any non-essential purchase over $50 has to wait 24 hours before she buys it. Most of the time, the urge fades completely by morning. This single habit, rebuilding friction on purpose in a frictionless world, quietly deleted the shopping apps that used to drain $40 or $50 a week from Susan's identical income bracket. It isn't about restriction, it's about reinstalling the pause that an entire generation of American women used to have built into their daily lives without ever thinking twice about it. The Great Count and Defining Enough. There's a moment in Linda's story that changed everything, and it happened not with a big purchase, but with a small piece of paper and a decision to count something most people never think to count. One Saturday morning, Linda pulled every shirt out of her closet and laid them across her bed. 42 shirts. She stood there staring at them, stunned, because she genuinely wore about 8 in regular rotation. The rest sat folded, untouched, taking up space in her closet and, she realized, in her mind. This is what her mother's ledger called the Great Count, physically counting what you own, category by category, until the number itself becomes the wake-up call. It isn't about shame, it's about confrontation with reality. Linda did the same exercise with kitchen gadgets, with shoes, with the mason jars stacked 3 deep in her pantry. Each time the number was higher than she expected, and each time the excess quietly represented money that had already left her hands and would never come back. But counting was only half the lesson. The deeper question, the one that actually changed her financial life, was defining enough. Not enough in some abstract aspirational sense, but a real, specific line she could write down. 8 shirts in rotation, 1 for each day of the work week plus a spare. A pantry stocked for 2 weeks, not 2 months. A wardrobe built around quality pieces that could be mended, patched, and worn for years, rather than fast fashion pieces designed to fall apart by the second wash. She thought of her grandmother's wool coat, hand-mended at the elbows for over a decade, still hanging in a closet somewhere, still warm. Once Linda wrote down her enough, something shifted. Shopping stopped being a search for satisfaction because she already knew what satisfaction looked like. She'd defined it on paper. Susan, meanwhile, was still searching, buying, returning, buying again, chasing a finish line she'd never actually drawn. The difference between these two women wasn't discipline. It was that one of them knew exactly where the finish line was, and the other was still running without a map. The Financial Margin and the Grandparents' Guide to Investing. By this point in the story, Linda's habits had quietly built something Susan didn't even know was missing: margin. Real, measurable space between what she earned and what she spent. And margin, it turns out, is the closest thing to a financial superpower an ordinary family can have. It doesn't require a high income. It doesn't require a lucky break. It requires attention, patience, and a set of habits an entire generation once practiced without a second thought. Every dollar Linda didn't spend on convenience, the homemade cleaning spray instead of the $12 bottle, the mended jeans instead of a new pair, the 8-shirt wardrobe instead of the overflowing closet, went somewhere specific, not into a vague savings account that quietly bled money back out during a hard month. It went into a simple, low-cost index fund, the modern equivalent of the coffee can behind Ruth's flour bin, except this coffee can grew on its own, year after year, without Linda lifting a finger once the transfer was automated. This is the part almost nobody explains clearly. The women of the Depression era weren't investors in the modern sense. They didn't have brokerage accounts or retirement calculators, but they understood the core principle investing is actually built on: protect your margin and let time do the rest. Linda simply modernized their instinct. Her grandmother preserved value by not spending. Linda preserves value by not spending and then puts what's left to work in the market, letting compound growth do quietly over 15 years what her grandmother's careful frugality did across a single tight season. It's worth pausing here to say clearly, none of this is a promise of riches. There are no guarantees in the market, and no ledger, envelope, or spreadsheet changes that fact. What margin offers isn't certainty of wealth, it's the raw material that makes financial security even possible in the first place. Susan, earning $43,000 more each year, had almost none of that raw material left over by the time her bills, subscriptions, and second costs were through with her paycheck. Linda, earning far less, had built a quiet, growing cushion most people twice her income will never have. The big reveal: what wealth actually buys. Here is the lesson that changes how you'll see every dollar for the rest of your life. Wealth was never really about the number in the bank account. It's about something almost nobody puts into words: optionality, the ability to say no. Not the ability to buy more, but the ability to refuse. Think about what Linda's 18 months of savings actually gives her. It isn't luxury, it's leverage. If her boss asked her to compromise her values, she could say no, because she isn't 2 missed paychecks from crisis. If a job offer came along that paid less but meant more time with her kids, she could say yes, because her family's survival didn't depend on maximizing every dollar. If she wanted to retire before 65 or take 3 months off to care for an aging parent, those doors were open because she had built the margin that keeps doors open. Susan, meanwhile, sits on a much larger paycheck with almost none of those same options. She can't say no to a toxic workplace because she needs the income too badly. She can't take the lower-paying, more meaningful job because her lifestyle has expanded to consume every dollar coming in. She owns a 75-inch television, a car she's still paying off, and a closet full of things she'd never buy again, and none of it can be traded back for the one thing she actually needs, which is freedom. She is, in the truest sense, wealthy on paper and trapped in practice. This is the secret Depression-era households understood instinctively, and that modern consumer culture has worked hard to make us forget. Money was never the finish line, freedom was. The women who lived through genuine scarcity weren't chasing bigger houses or brand-new furniture. They were chasing the ability to weather a bad season without losing everything. The ability to say, "We'll be all right," and mean it. That ability is optionality, and it can be built on $52,000 a year just as surely as it can be squandered on $95,000. The ending, the lesson, and the invitation. So which one of these women is actually rich? By every number that matters when the lights go out and the world gets uncertain, it isn't Susan, it's Linda. The woman with the smaller paycheck, the mended jeans, and the 18 months of breathing room tucked quietly into an account she barely thinks about day to day. Her wealth was never loud. It never had a leased SUV or a 75-inch television to announce it. It lived, instead, in a worn spiral notebook, in a kitchen drawer of carefully repurposed odds and ends, in the quiet confidence of a woman who knew exactly where her finish line was. What makes this story matter isn't nostalgia for a harder time. Nobody is asking you to give up modern conveniences or live without joy. What Linda's grandmother's generation left behind wasn't a set of restrictions, it was a set of questions. Would I buy this again? What is this thing really costing me? What does enough actually look like in my own life? Those questions cost nothing to ask, and yet they quietly separated two women earning very different paychecks into two very different futures. Susan isn't a cautionary tale because she did anything wrong. She simply never learned the questions Linda's mother wrote down in pencil more than 60 years ago. Questions modern life, with all its convenience and speed, was never designed to teach her. And that's really the point of this whole story. The wisdom didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because nobody was left to pass it down. Maybe the real inheritance isn't money at all. Maybe it's a ledger, a set of envelopes, a habit of pausing before you buy, the kind of quiet, deliberate thinking that built real security long before index funds and banking apps ever existed. Linda's found hers in a cedar chest. Yours might be sitting somewhere too, waiting to be remembered. So, here's the question worth sitting with. Do you think families today would save more if they went back to using cash for everyday spending the way Linda's mother did? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. And if this story gave you something worth carrying into your own kitchen, consider subscribing so the next forgotten lesson finds its way to you too.